engineer. I'm an engineer and basically focusing on rural technologies. My love for the writings and from childhood, at 10 years old, I wanted to be an inventor and participate in improvement of society, and became an engineer inventor. As Abdul Baha said in 1912, first and foremost is the principle that all the members of the body politic shall be given the greatest achievements of the world of humanity. Each one shall have the utmost welfare and well-being. So this is very much in the heart of anyone in the world who is a good wisher of society, and particularly Baha'is who really love the concept of unity. To solve, Abdul Baha said in 1912, to solve this problem, we must begin with the farmer. There will we lay a foundation for system and order, because the peasant class and the agricultural class exceed other classes in the importance of the services. That has been the inspiration for me doing a master's degree in rural engineering. And that's how I started, and in Canada, and then started travel throughout the world. I'm going to jump between algae and my own personal experience in life in different continents of the world. I will start to explain that there is about estimated between 40,000 to 100,000 species of algae. So it's enormous amount of species. And about 3,000 of them are commercially viable so far, as we know it. But what is extraordinary, there's a group of algae that are called cyanobacteria. Cyano means blue, and bacteria. Basically, the cyanobacteria have a history of about 3.6 billion years old existence. So they have a lot of experience. Each one of them is a kind of wealth of knowledge and experience about adaptation to the environmental condition and to different problems, solving problems and nutrient problems of the world. Each of the cyanobacteria is actually a biofactory. It's a mini factory that is continuously working and replicating itself. Many of these cyanobacteria are unicellular. That means that they multiply by doubling themselves. They don't need a kind of sexual interaction. They multiply by themselves as long as there's enough nutrient, and many are photosynthetic. They receive the photon that powers their mechanism to multiply. So, and many of them need very little to grow. They need the CO2, water, and the light, and some salt. And what is extraordinary is that not only they adapt to the environment, but also they can be modified and genetically modified. And also the modification can be also done through digestive system of the algae itself. And so they adapt through metabolic changes. For example, one algae, you can give it different nutrient that they are used to, and they react differently. So therefore, you can kind of program them through the nutrient system that you are feeding to them. They also adapt to the environment. So by changing the environment, you are also modifying the growth rate and the ability of algae to multiply. These enormous possibilities of algae, you can look at algae like a 3D printer. Basically, the code think of a machine in which you use an algae as the code. And so basically by giving them food and nutrient, you are able to multiply this ecosystem, mini ecosystem, we call them bioreactors. And so there are different types of way to grow algae in those bioreactors. Many of these bioreactors, they are also called photobioreactors because they run with either solar energy or through artificial light LED energy. So the photosynthetic part of it can be either artificially provided or using solar light. So they are extremely malleable. You can modify them, you can change them, the environment, they adapt. Some can reach temperature up to thousands of degrees. They resist to that in the stacks. Some are survive under freezing conditions. So basically, it's extraordinary the varieties of algae species that are there. And the beauty about algae is that if there is a pollution problem, let's say anywhere in the world, there are already some algae who are locally working already to solve the problem of that pollution. So the solution is right where the problem is, because there are already algae species that are existent in that environment, and they are solving the problem. They're adapting to the environment, and basically they are purifying and cleaning the environment automatically.
Soheyl, can I just, I'm sorry to interrupt you. A couple of people have commented, if you could make that PowerPoint a little larger, maybe you can pull it out so it covers more of the screen. There we go. That's better. That's okay. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. So basically, you can use these algae for multiple function. And now I'm going to slowly change. I didn't have, okay. I'm going to just jump directly into solutions that are provided by algae right now. For example, in the cosmetic and beauty, as you can see in the first one, then the pharma and medical applications. By the way, there are many pharmaceutical companies that are starting to use algae for producing vaccine at 1,000 times cheaper, and drugs. Any of the drugs that we are using today that have been synthesized actually have used algae as a source of solution. Like, for example, an algae called spirulina. And right now, there are companies, for example, a company called Lumen Biosciences in Seattle, who is now using algae to solve most of the problems of medical, such as, for example, Bill Gates is giving money for malaria. And so now they have a vaccine that uses spirulina, and they are putting some biologics, some bigger molecule into the stomach, I can say it, of the algae. The algae absorbs that and keeps it and grows it and then multiplies it. And then you have many molecules of vaccines. So 1,000 times cheaper. So soon, many pharmaceutical companies will have to compete with the algae companies, because the algae companies are providing a safer, more organic solution to the problems. Algae also is a supplement and nutraceutical, extraordinary for protein, for vitamins, for blood, for DHA, for omega, and you name it. And for bioplastics, packaging solutions from algae are starting to pop up, and more companies, including the textile industry, the fabric companies now are using algae as a fiber in soil and water treatment. There's a lot of solutions that are emerging right now, and a lot of companies will be slowly increasing the wastewater treatment using algae. No need to say the biofuel, the original fossil fuel that we have in the world comes from algae. And basically, that's a lot of companies like ExxonMobil and others are trying to develop that solution. It's still not financially viable, but we're getting slowly and slowly closer to that. The pet food and fertilizers, and this is an area that I'm particularly interested, fertilizers, because I will give a slide after that about explaining about fertilizers and biofertilizers, the difference. And finally, there's a lot of algae, also a company called Solazyme who does cooking oils out of algae, protein bars, and baby formulas, and you name it. Anything that comes to mind that exists in nature, there is an ingredient that originally comes from algae. And algae, but particularly cyanobacteria, is actually the mother, you can call it, the base of most of the ingredient of nature, planet Earth. And if there is actually a tree of life, and that in that tree of life, you see that cyanobacteria have a bifurcation into the bacterial world and to the plant world. And it comes from there. So basically, we are now going to go to a slideshow. Basically, that slideshow was done by a partner of us, which is the University of British Columbia, UBC. Basically, it's a project that we were presenting on the environmental impact of agriculture on the world and how algae can become a solution to the problem. So basically, I'm going to make, okay, good. So basically, we know the problem. You are the experts of knowledgeable about the major problem that humanity is facing with deforestation and contamination. I'm going to make my slide here a little bit more. How come I am so big on the screen here? Okay, any optimization here? Okay, I think, yeah. So basically, we know that there's contaminated water. There is a major food insecurity that is happening mostly in the northern part of Canada. And this is an example of how algae can become a solution to the food problem in areas that are absolutely in difficulties with food insecurity. For example, in Nunavut, 57% of the people, 78% of children have food insecurity problems. And Yukon and nationwide in Canada, we have 12.7% of children, 17.3% of children who have food insecurity. And we're in Canada. Imagine now the whole world. Now, for example, there are conditions in which we have problems of roads are being cut off and supply chain challenges that we're facing. And now we're looking at the solution. And algae is actually a solution as a protein alternative. Here, for example, comparing to the meat industry, the global meat industry is 6.6 billion. The global single-cell protein market is 5. And the algae solution right now is $341 million. And our little company, Alga Bloom, is close to. Now I'm going to talk about fertilizers and the difference, why algae is the future, why algae will make our planet more sustainable. There are two types, as you can see, there are two types of fertilizer. On the right side, the synthetic fertilizer, and on the left side, you have the organic fertilizer, which also we call biofertilizer. The synthetic fertilizer, you need them every year, and they come mostly from chemicals. Whereas the algae fertilizer, the biofertilizer, are actually feeding the organic matters, and then the organic create soil nutrient, and then this feed the microorganism, and the microorganism are feeding the roots. So basically, biofertilizer are kind of waking up dormant, possibly thousands and thousands of years of kind of microbial sleeping community in the ground. When you give algae, certain types of algae, they are fed and they wake up. And once they wake up, they start to actually absorb the nitrogen from the air. They extract nitrogen from the air and they give it to the roots of the plant. And these are called biofertilizers. And one of the algae that actually we are growing, called AB48, is actually that has the power of collecting, extracting the nitrogen from the air and giving it to the algae. The algae gives it to the soil, and then the plant benefits. So the beauty is that once you start with the biofertilizer, the process is naturally empowering the soil nutrient, the microorganism in the soil. You don't need any more fertilizer after that, because the soil, the community is able, the bacterial community is able to feed. So this is fundamental. And if you look at the left side, you see that actually as a fertilizer, the algae biomass is as good as any synthetic, and much better than synthetic materials, synthetic fertilizers. Yeah, this is basically, now we are going to talk a little bit about technology. Before I jump to this slide, I will show you a little bit some of the technologies that we have been, my company has been involved since 2009. I went to China, and we pioneered with my wife to China, and the air pollution was so bad. I started to lecture at the university about environmental technology, but after 1 year, I said to myself, I'm wasting my time here. Talking is easy. It's going to do the action. So I started to approach the university, and I said, let's use your roof as a place for growing algae. Algae can absorb the pollution and release oxygen. So basically, we started, as many of you know, algae is growing basically in large amounts of water. But I kind of realized soon that always there is a biofilm. Algae loves to attach itself to environment more and becomes denser than in the huge amount of water. So then I decided that why not focus on where algae accumulates itself more denser than into this huge amount of water, because it becomes a water management rather than algae culture management. So basically, I left the idea of large volume of water and focused on biofilm. Biofilm is where a big, thick algae thickness can attaches to different substrate or surfaces, and then you can scrape out, squeegee out the algae, and basically you get what you want, instead of doing huge amount of water management to extract tiny bit of algae in it. So I started to focus, and I developed a number of technologies The first one was in China, in Qingdao, in which it is a long plastic bag that is laid over the ground. And this long plastic bag could be put also over a field, and then algae can grow there. And then the problem of extraction was becoming a challenge, but a simple rope with a squeegee inside was solving the problem. So that was, and you can see here 2 models, and then another one was put on water, floating elements. Finally, I came back to Canada, and in 2014, I created a company called Alga Bloom. And in that company, because of the weather, cold weather condition of Canada, I decided to put them in a container that we called Alga Box. And inside the Alga Box, you have platforms, and you have these platforms, and algae grows in between these platforms of layers, and you have special light system that we developed, and then the light allows the algae to grow at the speed that you want. Later, we moved in a farm and did the same thing in a farm. So, basically, and then this led, later on, I heard that the NASA was looking for a technology for space. And basically they said, out of nothing, you have, because on the moon or on Mars, you basically have nothing and you have to grow food. And there was the food deep space food challenge. And I said, well, I dare to propose a technology to solve the problem. Algae, why algae can solve the problem? Because basically astronauts are exhausting carbon dioxide. So basically, the carbon dioxide is available, and that's one of the most important part of algae, because algae is a carbon-based, needs a carbon source. Carbon source can be gas, or can be mixed with water, salt. A carbon source can be mixed into, diffused into the water, or the carbon source can be from minerals that contain certain salts that contain some carbon, like, for example, calcium carbonate or some kind of baking soda. These all contain carbonate, and this could be served as a food to the algae. So for astronauts, I thought that CO2 from the astronaut themselves could be a source of food for the algae. The light, for example, on the moon, you have 16 times on and off light and darkness, day and night, 16 times to our daylight. So basically, on 24 hours. So basically, you have access to light, and then you need other nutrients. You need salts and other nutrients. And human waste, like pee, is actually the perfect model of ingredient for the algae. And I was astonished doing further studies on the ability of pee as a nutrient. And right now, actually, we are developing some formula in which pee is transformed into granules, and they purified. And then these granules can be used. They are so pure, they're exactly like urea that is used in the agriculture sector. And pea is one of the extraordinary fertilizers that, unfortunately, in the world, we are wasting. We have so much fertilizer that we are wasting, and they're contaminating our wastewater treatment. They are destroying our environment. And this wealth is extraordinary and not being used at all. And I highly recommend the group, the agriculture group, to look into P as a solution for fertilizer. And there are technologies, very simple technologies of how anybody, anywhere in the world could get fertilizer right away at very high quality fertilizer. And so anyway, that's one of the things that I highly recommend. At least it's my take from this presentation, my gift. So basically, once the technology was, so I proposed a solution to the NASA, and we are, okay, let me see if I can open this file. Okay, where is it? Okay, here it is. It's hidden behind my presentation here. Let's see. Okay, there. Okay, slide. Okay, this is the one. Okay, this is hiding. I have to find a way to get it off there. This is something is preventing from moving. Okay, there it is. Okay, so basically, what I'm presenting for space is a technology that is we call the Alga Cube, or a different version of that, but the machine is called Alga Cube. That's the name of the machine. And the machine has substrate that are either vertically or horizontally laid. And basically, algae grows between these layers. And that's how it works. And here, for example, is a picture of how this is done. Basically, you can see the algae grows and can be on a platform, and the algae is very thick and can be collected in this way. So basically, it's an algae that the beauty of most of the algae, the cyanobacteria, they can be cultivated into very high salt level. And the pH, some of the pH can go up to 13. That means no other bacterial condition can survive in such a high pH. That means that you are always safe. And the second one is the cultivation, the pH, as I said, could go up to 13. And that's very high. And that's that shows that we can actually have growth system that could actually be kept clean from contamination and grow that in any part of the world without fearing that it will be contaminated from the environment or from the workers who may have dirty hands and could contaminate the food. So basically, that's it. So that is basically my presentation. And let me see. And just to give you a brief history of where I come from, in 1976, we pioneered with my late wife, Monique, to Zaire, to Congo. And when we arrived there was quite a number of villagers who were living in total poverty. And they were some pygmies, African pygmies, who were living there. And the pygmies were being chased out of the forest because, like the Amazon, they were cutting all the trees. And the people, the pygmies, had no way to survive. And they were dying in big numbers. And just before that, they had a vision that the time of world unity had come. And massively, many of the pygmies had become Baha'is because one African from Congo had walked in the forest and talked to the pygmies that the time of unity has come. At that time, the pygmies, and unfortunately up to today, they are considered, unfortunately, like they were considered like animals of the forest. They were not considered as equal to other human beings. But when they heard about the Baha'i faith, massively the pygmies became Baha'is. So when we went and pioneered to Congo, to east part of Congo, first north and then east, then we decided that we will go and find a solution for the survival of the pygmies. And so basically the solution was to offer education against land. And so basically we created what is called a functional literacy program, including health, agriculture, and food. And basically this agriculture program, this literacy program was asking 10 questions. What is the most important thing for you? And for example, they would say avocado. So then the functional literacy program would teach them how to grow avocado, how to sell avocado. What is the nutritional value of avocado? What is the content of avocado? How do you fertilize it? How do you grow it? What can you do? What are the business transactions? What is the market of avocado? And so they will learn everything about avocado. And along that, they would also learn how to write avocado. So this functional literacy program became very, very big. And so we were looking for teachers, but in most of the villages, anybody who knows how to read and write and becomes a little bit educated, they leave the small villages and they go to big cities. So we had to find a system of education in which there will be no mass exodus of the people from the village to the big cities. So the only way to do that is to provide a gradual education program where the whole community is educated. And so you would give a little bit of education to the teachers who themselves had very little education. And these teachers will give a little bit of education to the student, and the whole group will grow together. The teacher and the student would grow step by step together, and the whole community is lifted up together. Rather than having teachers that are well educated and then they leave the village, the teachers were receive just partial amount of education, just enough, a kind of one step ahead of the student. So the whole system allowed thousands and thousands and thousands of people to be educated, and about 30,000 people benefited from a literacy program. It's called functional literacy. And so basically these are, for example, an example in which they are passing through different levels of knowledge. And you don't see women here, but later on, we had 3,000 women because women were given priority in literacy and education. And then it became a program of mass. By the way, many of you may know that we reached about 500 Baha'i villages in Zaire, Congo, in 1989, when we left. The faith had grown to a level in which in Kivu, only one province, we had all these villagers who had local assemblies, and they were all. And just also to share with you some beautiful memory is that when in 1989, when we left to pioneer out of Zaire to go to Laos, next to Vietnam, when we left, people who were friends of the faith were lining up in front of the door of the meeting of the local assemblies to ask guidance from the local assemblies, because the faith had reached a point where the local assemblies were becoming so trusted by the people that anybody who had any conflict in the village or any in the surrounding villages, they would come to ask guidance from the local assemblies. And that's what Congo was about. And anyway, they benefited a lot from the literacy programs and the education, and that was guided by the House of Justice, all the steps of literacy and education. I think I have talked a lot, and I'm so happy that you gave me this opportunity to share these stories. And now we can spend maybe a few moments talking and answering questions.
Thank you, Soheyl. Thank you so much. You can stop sharing screen now.
Okay, let me learn how to do that. Just
So
one
go
second.
to the bottom. Just go to
Okay.
the bottom and
Yeah, stop sharing. Yes,
stop
thank
sharing.
you.
There we go. Now we can see everyone. Thank you. That's great.
Soheyl, you have a message in the chat from Holiance in Kenya. Maybe Holiance would like to say what he was sending. Uh-oh, the audio is still not working, Holiance.
Okay. Well, I can read it to you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, the chat. Okay,
In the
there you
chat.
are. That's
he
right.
says-
I got it.
Okay, you see, yeah, right. There was also another comment here from Mark Griffith, and I believe Mark had to leave. Says algae is a component. If you look in the, I don't know if you can look in the chat. It says algae is a component in Schmutzdecke, a thin layer of minerals, bacteria, and algae that makes drinking water from raw water by filtering and biologically reacting to pathogens in water. It is slow sand technology invented around 1900, but replaced by rapid sand with chemicals, energy, and technology because it used less space. Slow sand water treatment has been back in sub-Saharan Africa for a few decades as a point of use treatment. Some slow sand municipal plants still exist in the US. It requires no chemicals, less energy, more space, more manual labor to clean the layer periodically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have any comment on that?
Well, absolutely. And just to tell you, in Chernobyl and everywhere there has been a nuclear disaster, algae has been used for two purposes. One is algae eaten by the children or by the people. I'm talking algae spirulina particularly. It absorbs the uranium in the body and takes it out and eject it. That's from the human body. All the children who had spirulina survived and healed. So that was used the first time in Hiroshima. Then it was used in Chernobyl. Now, the same algae, if you have a uranium contamination on a land or somewhere in a mine, if you put the algae will actually collect the uranium, concentrate it, and therefore, instead of having this uranium spread in an environment, it could collect, concentrate, and then you are a small amount of contaminant to deal with. That's it.
Yes, thank you. So if you have a question or comment, could you raise your hand? Next we have Roy.
Thank you, Soheyl. That's absolutely amazing. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about, and apologies for background noise, about the biofertilizer, and what you are learning about the cost effectiveness of it. How does it, You know, a lot of times it's been very expensive, especially since it tends to be bulky. Where have you found it to be work in terms of the cost structure?
I will be honest with you, we still don't have cost effectiveness because it's something that is very, very, very new at the edge of technology. But what is very exciting is that once you have the right algae that you have grown up and you have a dense quantity of it, you can use that and ferment it with other bacteria. And then you are multiplying by 200 or 1,000 times the volume of what you have. And then you add that to additional water and you spray that on a field. So basically, the enzyme play a major role. Enzymes are extraordinary in algae. And anybody who eats any food that is dry, we know by experience or by science that only the body can absorb, let's say, 5 to 10% of a dried powder. Whereas the same product, when it comes with the proper enzyme, you get 95% digestion. So basically, it's the same thing with algae. Algae that comes with enzyme has enormous power. And so when you multiply it through fermentation, you are using the algae as a core, and then you multiply that through large amount of fermentation, and then you add that to large volume of water and you spray that. So with small amount of algae, you get enormous amount of benefit.
Thank you. Janet?
Yeah, I was just watching a TED talk by Graham Sate about humus and how important humus is. And in that talk, he mentions that 50% of our oxygen comes from the phytoplankton in the oceans, and that we've destroyed 40% of these beautiful phytoplankton. And I'm just wondering if these algae technologies can help us restore the, it's because the oceans are acidic because of the high temperatures, because of the climate change and the high temperatures, the oceans have become acidic. So that's why the phytoplankton are, reducing in numbers, and they produce so much of our oxygen. So I'm hoping to hear that maybe some of these algae can be, somehow an inoculant or something to help the oceans recover or help the phytoplankton recover so we can have more oxygen again. Or maybe to be able to bring the carbon down from the air into the land and into the water. I don't know.
There is one little solution, because when you talk ocean, you talk about huge volumes of water. Actually, Kevin, who is together right in the group here with me, we actually created a patent in which we developed a technology in which we create a kind of controlled environment inside a pond or inside the lake, and we isolate that little environment into the water itself. And then we grow algae within that small confined area that is like a tent under the water. And then the algae accumulates in that little environment. And then we gradually do a second tent, third tent, and then slowly and slowly, the volume of algae that is specialized, different than the algae of the ocean or the pond or the lake. This was actually developed the technology for Suncor, the energy, the big energy company that destroyed most of our sand in Alberta, the oil sands. So basically, the idea is to use polluted ponds and to isolate a small section of that polluted pond with a special kind of tent, and then to grow algae adapted to that little environment that you still can control within the water. It's in situ into the water itself. And then you propagate slowly and slowly that algae into a bigger tent, and then slowly and slowly and slowly. And then when there's adaptation, then you release that algae into the whole environment. And so you are able to kind of populate with the right algae to purify the environment. It's not about the ocean, it's about the pond. It's about something that you still have kind of some kind of control. Ocean, we just have to stop to pollute it. I don't see other solution to that.
Yes, thank you. James Craig? You're muted.
Okay, thank you. Back in 1978, I was doing coal mine reclamation, and I found a company from Germany that was producing a product called Algae, and I used it on coal mine reclamation. And I loved it. It was so great. I had an experience, I was experimenting, and I found that I've got a truck that would spread human compost, human manure. And then we sprayed that and put it kind of in the gullies, and we and sprayed it with this algae, and it created a film of life. And I could see how it would, if we planted legumes and planted the right things, I could see how it would really change the soil in a fast way. And I also used it to spray on damaged plants. There was somebody that had run over some hemlock trees, and I went and sprayed it with that algae, and it seemed to keep the plant from dying. But anyway, so I've had that experience, and it seemed to work really great. Have you heard of the company Algae from Germany that was back 40 years ago?
No, I didn't. No, I wish I discovered algae in 2009 because of the pollution of China and the air. And my background is mostly renewable energy. And basically in 1978, I developed gasification technology in Africa. Just using anything on the road, you put it in a gas that you attach to your car, and you run your car without any fuel. Just by anything that you found on the road that can burn, you just take it, put it in your car, and you run. And so we did it in Africa, in Congo, and we transformed cars because at that time we didn't have fuel. And so the only way to run was to do gasification. Basically, gasification is very simple. You change CO2 into CO, and CO is explosive and runs the carburetor. Anyway, I think let's go back to algae.
Yeah.
Okay.
This company was getting seaweed from the North Sea.
Oh, I wish you have. Can you find any trace of them?
It's been 40 years. I don't think so.
Well, you are so right, because the first experiment that was done on algae was done in 1950, the very close date in which I was born. And I feel a kind of, how do you call it, a soulmate to that date, because on the Carnegie building in the US, they did the first experiment of the first bioreactor in the world, growing algae over the roof, and 1950. So you're right, that's the years already that they knew about algae, but at that time, fuel and all that was so dirt cheap that nobody was paying attention to algae. Who would care about algae?
I had one friend that me and him were just enthusiastic, as I can see you are, that we just love that algae.
Thank you. Fascinating. Holiance?
able to hear me now?
Can hear you now, yes.
Okay, thanks. This was a great presentation, Mr. Soheyl. I really loved it. Oftentimes there are spaces like as a young person we go to, and it all sounds gloom and gloom, but you know, this one is one of those presentations that gives us as young people that there's still light at the end of the tunnel. And with this technology, if we can find a way of making it cost effective and making prototypes that can also be used like in rural places, I believe we can find means of, we can find fertilizers to feed huge population. Like for example, in sub-Sahara Africa, this can be very great, big for us. And then you made the story about your days as a pioneer in DRC Congo. I hope you will be able to attend when the house of worship which is built in Congo is open, so that you can see, you know, glimpses of the seeds that you planted. Now it's grown into trees and is blossoming in DRC Congo. The faith is growing quite well over there.
I would love. I don't know the date when they open the temple, but I would love to go there and visit again. I heard it's maybe in October. I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for the invitation. And definitely there are NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that are actually creating small micro farms, French NGOs. And I highly recommend that, connecting with them. And they have small scale pond technologies in which they create a greenhouse and they grow algae over water. I personally am not very much supportive of a big amount of water, because water is very scarce and is very difficult nowadays. We have to be so careful about water resources. So I believe in biofilm technology, and I am going to work very soon on developing biofilm technology for rural communities, in which masses of people will have access to different species of algae for rural communities. But at this time, I have to kind of finish what I promised with the NASA project. And honestly, I am not looking at space at all. The prestige that the NASA gives gives recognition for the work that I'm doing on Earth. And so I'm not planning to go to the moon or send the technology to the moon. I rather, we have so many problems to solve on planet Earth but the whole incentive of the NASA and all this is a good PR for the knowledge of algae on planet Earth.
Thank you. Arthur?
Thank you. Well, I know that you're a specialist in cyanobacteria. My original scientific specialty is marine algae. So I've worked on algae for more than, 50, 60 years. But I just came back from the Caribbean, where they have an enormous problem now with sargassum growing, drifting, and coming up on the beaches all across the area in great masses every morning. It's seen as a waste. And yet it seems to me that it ought to be a resource for many, many things. As a good engineer, can you suggest what should be done with all of that massive sargassum that would help the small island states and all of the coastal areas to turn it into a resource? Can it be used for energy, for fertilizer, for food? Can it be fed to cows so they produce less methane, and whatever? There must be some ideas that you could give for those solutions. Thank you.
The Baltic countries are the perfect example to look for solution. Norway, Sweden, and all these countries, they have so many solutions that they are using for northern territories, for the Baltic territories and so on. I'm sorry, Baltic, Scandinavian basically what I'm saying is that the solutions are there and they are already applying it. So I highly recommend to look at what are the type of solution that they are. For example, in Sweden right now, they are using urine. They are starting now to use urine and collecting from urine from houses to make biofertilizers. So there are technologies right now being popular now everywhere. And algae is also one of the greatest resources. And we just have to look at it as a solution, not as a problem. So I'm sure Scandinavian, if you go to any website of Scandinavian communities, they have many, many solutions that they are coming with algae. Exactly what you said, fertilizer, food, alginate, you know, the ingredient that sticks food together, the perfect glue of many of the, there's so many application cosmetics that they are used and so many applications with algae. The list is infinitely long, but the most practical ones, they are being right now used in Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We have a couple of comments here in the chat and questions in the chat. Richard, you had a question in there. Would you like to ask your question about small
Sure.
scale? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the use of urine as a source of fertilization. Might you know of a small scale method for its functional use?
Sorry, repeat that question. I didn't.
Yes, earlier you spoke as the use of urine as a source of fertilization. And might you know of a small scale method that is used that could be used, for example, on small scale farm?
Yeah, as I said, for example, go to Sweden. Right now, they have started a project in which they are doing that. The name doesn't come to mind, but if you put convert urine to urea, Sweden,
Yeah.
Okay,
on Google,
thank
and
you.
you will see that they have solutions that they are right now doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could just kind of butt in here a little bit and mention I've done some kind of looking at that myself, because you see these, if you go to YouTube, you'll find videos of lots of people doing this. And there are companies, people that do it commercially, I think in Vermont, I think there's a company that does it. And they go around and they collect urine from houses and they convert it, they age it. There's a process that you go through to age it and convert it. But it's pretty simple. And a lot of people, I mean, you even find, you'll find YouTube videos of people in very remote areas actually doing this. It's a traditional thing to do. So it's not something new. It's something people have found, you know, for millennia probably to do this. Yeah. But there are a lot of people doing it now. So if you look on YouTube, you'll find it, or just search, you know, Google, you'll find lots of information about it.
Thank you.
Thanks. So Neil.
So we know that humans produce urine and feces every day. What about feces and algae? Is that more complicated?
I think so. It's another stage of complication. And actually, the NASA is very much not in favor of it. But I know the urine is urea, and urea is commonly used as a fertilizer. So it's still psychologically acceptable. But I'm sure that you know, if for example in Africa and in China and anywhere in the world right now, composting of human waste generate methane, so you use as a biogas, and then you have leachate from the compost that could be used for algae, and that's perfect. So basically, you need a process in between. You transform it into a composting, then goes leachate gives to algae is perfect. And then at the same time, you also get the methane that you burn, and you get the CO2. The CO2 you convert it, you give it back to the algae at the very end of the cycle. So basically, you are not losing anything. You are converting everything into extremely useful product.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and I could just say again, there are people who actually have these, there are contraptions they have that collect, they call it biogas, and they compost, and they can use the methane to power whatever they need. So there are people out there there are a lot of people doing things that are, they're not real conventional thinkers. They're thinking outside the box, and I love that, Soheyl. I just love the way you think about things, because these are the solutions. We have to figure out how to use all our resources, Okay, Winnie?
I'm interested in the analysis of the waste product, because as you know, the sewage system is being studied now in the United States to see where the viruses are, et cetera. And there are so many also pharmaceuticals and things like that in the waste products. Does this cause any problem when you're trying to convert the urine?
Yes, it is. It is a big problem. There are some studies that suggest that if you let ferment urine by itself a certain amount of time, it deactivates the bacteria or some of the negative effect of pharmaceuticals into urine. That's number one. Number two, there are studies that suggest that if you put urine over biochar, you know what I mean by biochar, all of us. If you put that, 98% of all the pharmaceutical is absorbed into the biochar. So, so that already tells you that there are ways to overcome the problems of the pharmaceuticals in the urine. And then the rest, 2%, we'll have to live with.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, there are several comments here in the chat. Let's see. Yes, Kevin Wilson says a company that does just that is homebiogas.com. So he's in the chat, he's placed a website for information on biogas. Right. Any other comments or questions?
I'd just like to mention about the Living Water company in the UK. That is Jane and David Shields, and they've been using, basically mimicking the marshes and estuaries for about 30 or 40 years now. And they use plants as well as algae. So they where the pollution is, where the effluent's coming out, then they make like a drain area, and then they put all kinds of plants, a big variety of marsh, of wetland plants, and then they inoculate with them bacteria and other microorganisms, algae and so on, and then they can clean up the pollution. And they've done that with compost as well. And thermophilic bacteria can actually transform heavy metals. So they have a lot of experience. So if you look up their website, livingwater.org.uk, you can see a list of the companies. They do pollution control for BP, for that soap company, Body Shop, I think it is, different companies. They make greenhouses if they don't have enough space. Fish factories, different sorts of, depends the area. If they have enough space, they just do it out in nature, like a youth hostel that me and my kids helped many years ago to plant the plants and inoculants. was just out, and then they run the water, run the effluent after that drainage area. Then they run it into the forest, and the water is so clean you can drink it. And then if it's a small space, like the Body Shop didn't have a lot of space, they make it into a greenhouse to make the whole process more intensive. But they don't use just one species of algae. They use a variety of plants and microorganisms that they find in nature and then cultivate it. So Jane's, PhD and stuff is in the microorganisms. The website has a whole list of the different companies they've worked. And she's also done work on coral reefs, and she's done work on cleaning up weed problems like in the Lake Victoria in Africa, and she's worked all over the world.
Thank you. Winnie?
Well, that's related to something that I learned decades ago, and I don't know if more cities are doing it or if it lasted, but Oxford, Mississippi took its sewage waste and created drinkable water from it by having a series of ponds with various greenage in them, and then running it under a light at the very end, which finished the process. So I don't know if that is still a way that towns are able to do, or how that worked. Perhaps somebody does know. Maybe not.
Anyone? No?
I wondered if some of our water experts like Mark or others might have run into that and know something about it. Oh, you said Mark had to leave, didn't you?
Yeah, I think Mark had to leave.
Okay.
It's gone. Yeah.
So Don, if I could ask a question.
Sure.
So Hale, go back to, so I'm a small farmer using algae as a fertilizer source. Could you explain that again? You mentioned that it, how does like the nitrogen fixing work? So how do you get nitrogen out of algae as an algae source? If you could explain that, please.
Well, there are some algae species who have this ability to absorb nitrogen from the air. Not all algae. There are some algae specialized in more lipid, oil. Some algae specialized in more protein. Some algae have different vitamins and different. So different algae have different properties and abilities. And there are some algae, for example, the algae that we use, one of them is called AB48. AB is actually, we started with spirulina, and somehow that algae emerged into something else, became more resilient, became more potent, adapted to the Canadian environment, which we bought. Spirulina is a tropical algae, but it adapted to the environment. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that some algae have this ability to absorb the nitrogen from the air. And then that nitrogen, they absorb it, they collect it, and then if you spray that algae over the land, then the nitrogen from the algae provides the nitrogen that you need for the soil.
So I think the question had been asked, are those products commercially available today?
Say that again,
Are those products commercially, can you get this today? Is it
well, no, it's not yet commercially available, but there are some companies who just, I don't know, receive $100 million just to do that on the internet. If you look, they just got $100 million exactly to as as an investors group because they found the right algae. We have it, and we didn't know that it was such a value. So maybe one day we'll become rich like them too. But I'm just basically saying we have not commercialized it, but it's available. And if you know how to grow algae, I'm happy to provide you some samples of that, of our algae called AB48, who has that ability. Are you able to grow algae?
I have algae growing where I don't want it to grow. So yeah, I guess so. So I have,
well, basically, where is that algae that you don't want is growing? Where is it growing?
so I have water collectors.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I have water collectors.
You are on a farm, or you are
Yeah,
in
I'm on a farm and I collect water off roofs and stuff that I use as water sources. And of course, algae always grows in those. So you're saying I can inoculate these water sources with your algae, and I would have nitrogen. I could use that as fertilizer.
you know, there are a lot of other factors that allow algae to grow. Their temperature, there's salinity, the alkaline, you know, the pH control. There's a lot of things that have to be controlled for certain algae to grow at the beginning before they become the dominant algae of the environment, of that environment. So there is a lot of steps that need to be done before you are actually kind of creating a dominant situation in which the real algae that you want to grow is actually controlling the algae that you don't want to grow. So you have to create pH condition in which, for example, in our algae, if we want to dominate, we change the pH to, let's say, pH 10, 11, 12. And then all the other algae die, all the microbial system die, but then the algae that you have chosen, who lives at pH 12 or 13, survives. And therefore you are cleaning the environment, and now you are starting a new, completely regeneration of the environment.
So if I had your contact address, you could supply me with these different instructions.
It's not my specialty. I mean, in that sense, the ponds and all these things, I'm not really familiar too much. I focus mostly on bioreactors that are biofilm based. But I'm just sharing the older experiences that we had. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we just have a few more minutes left. We usually like to end around 2:30. So we have James and Janet.
So real quick, I think using the algae in the soil, if you had sterile soil that didn't have any life and you were trying to invigorate it, then you could use the algae as one of, almost like you would use compost, just to bring some organic matter into the soil, some life into the soil. And then if you had some carbon and some plants to grow, you could accelerate the advancement of the soil. I think that's, and again, the science behind it, because there's different algae and different microclimates. You get off into something, but it is fun to try to build up the soil, and algae is a real good tool to help do that, I think.
In China, they are using algae, seaweed, and all the algae, the Arthur you were talking about, to regenerate all the deserts. They're gaining enormous amount of land, reclaiming all the soil that was completely dead, arid, completely no use at all. They put algae, after some years, they come back, they are doing agriculture on it. So that's exactly what, James, you're mentioning. That's what they do in China, and probably it can be done anywhere in the world because this algae contains so much organic material.
Thank you. Janet?
And just pointing out what Neil put in the chat, that the Algae company of Germany is still in business, and that's what they're selling is stuff to put on the agriculture land. So
Good.
yeah. And I also wanted to point out to Billy that Jane Shields at Living Water originally comes from New Jersey, so she comes across quite often, and you know, she might be the sort of person who would have a chance to give the instructions. Her specialty is more on algae and microorganisms and how they work. That's what her PhD is in, and all her years of experience is growing the plants and the microorganisms. It's not in nature, it's not making, you know, reactors. Yeah. So she might be able to help with getting the right algae to fix nitrogen in your water. And it would be so useful, because that's another big problem with climate change, is that, you know, nitrates going in the atmosphere are even more powerful at creating the greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide. So if we could figure out how to get these greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and into the water and the soil, that would really, really help us, even more effective than reducing emissions, because reducing emissions takes a long time to actually have an impact, whereas getting the carbon and other greenhouse gases out of the air and into where it's useful can really help with the climate change.
Maybe Janet, you can share that link to that German company, algae company, on the chat.
Yeah, Neil put it already. Algin is spelled ALGINURE.DE. Neil McMillan found it.
Yeah.
I'll put it in again.
Yeah, just put it in again. That'd be great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This was fascinating, I will say, a fascinating discussion, fascinating presentation. We appreciate so much, Soheyl, you spending some time with us. Next month, our plan is to have Paul Hanley again, and he is to talk about the food prize, Rockefeller Foundation Food Prize, the progress of it. As some of you are aware, he and some other people won a prize from the Rockefeller Foundation, and so we're going to get an update on that, of what's happening with that. So, and I've put in the chat, I did put a link to our YouTube channel, and you can look us up if you want to see videos. We'll be posting this video within probably the next week. Yeah, there's so much. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it again, because I think I missed a lot. It just was a lot of information. It was great. And so thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, Soheyl.
Thank you,
so much.
Soheyl. Thank you.
Bye-bye. It was nice meeting all of you.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
There's a little quotation I'd like to sing to end with. It says, "The life-giving water is the love of God, and this love gives life to our souls. The life-giving water is the love of God, and this love gives life to our souls." And it's just reminding us to really honor and respect nature as the embodiment of God's will, the maker, the creator. And we can just really be thankful to God for these amazing things that we're discovering. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.